Welcome back once again, everybody. I'm super excited to have the world-renowned Joel Salatin. He is probably one of the best known organic farmers in the English-speaking world. He's here in Virginia as well. My practices, so I'm really excited to talk with him about all things real food, all things nutrition in relation to like using food as medicine. And as one of the best known organic farmers in the English speaking world, I feel like he can speak to all those things as well. And we're going to talk about all of his books as well and his personal journey. So after a introduction, we're just going to dive into things. So um, Joel Salatin calls himself the Christian libertarian environmentalist capitalist lunatic farmer, which is a lot of interesting things all running together. I already mentioned he's one of the most famous farmers in the world. He's also one of the more eclectic thinkers from Virginia, potentially since Thomas Jefferson. People who don't like his message, this is actually coming right off his website, so I'm just reading from what he's put out there. Call him a bioterrorist, typhoid Mary, a charlatan, and a starvation advocate, which we might actually talk about how politics play into eating real food, which seems kind of bizarre. Um, he co-owns this family farm, Polyface, in Super Virginia. He's been featured in New York Times bestseller Omnivore's Dilemma, as well as the award-winning documentary Food Inc. His farm, I think this is really interesting. His farm services more than 5,000 families, 50 restaurants, 10 retail outlets, and a farmer's market, and with salad bar beef, pork, pastured poultry, forestry products, a whole host of things. So he literally is providing for thousands of people's daily substance, which is kind of gets you back to the earth. He's the editor for the Stockman Grass Farmer, which is the granddaddy catalyst for the grass farming movement, which is really exciting. And he also co-hosts a podcast titled Beyond Labels with the co-author of the book Beyond Labels, Dr. Sana McCullough. So, Joel, I am super excited to have you today to talk to you.
Thank you, Dr. Aaron. I couldn't be more honored and privileged to be with you. Glad to share the time.
Yeah. So one of the things I think, in the introductory, how you introduce yourself, I think, again, this is off your bio from your website, I think part of your journey goes into this, people either love you or they have questions, the whole thing of the bioterrorist, typhoid Mary, charlatan kind of thing. I want to take a dive a little bit into your family history. Like you are a multi-generational farmer. You have a very interesting history going out of the country, coming back. And then, where you your family ended up taking farmland in Virginia that was actually not very good and turning it into like amazing farmland. Could you like walk us through that journey? Because I think part of that is just the difficulty, what you went through
Yep.
has a lot to do with like organizations,
Sure.
government regulation, a whole host of
hmm
things that people I think are now starting to realize affects the food we put on our plates.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So yeah, we'll start with my dad. Well, actually, my grandfather was a charter subscriber to Rodale's Organic Gardening and Farming magazine when it came out in 1945. The country had quite a tension right then, right post World War II, as to whether it would go chemical or chemical or compost. Those two kind of pathways were really in tension at that time. And my grandfather chose the biological approach, and Dad got that from him. Well, Dad wanted a farm, and here he is, no money, no land, Midwest kid. How do you get a farm? And he was enamored of developing countries, saw them as a real open opportunity, cheap land, very little government regulation. And so after he flew in the Navy in World War II, got out, GI Bill, went to Indiana University, got his degree in business, went to Middlebury in Vermont, and got his Spanish, and tested for the civil service exam and passed it first go, and went with Texas Oil Company as a bilingual accountant on the Wildcat oil drilling that was just to begin off of Venezuela, and in 7 years was able to save enough money to buy a 1,000-acre farm in the Venezuelan highlands. And by that time, he and Mom had married, and by that time they'd had my older brother and then me. So here we are out on a farm, and his dream was milk and chickens. So chickens have a quicker turnaround, so let's start with chickens. So he started growing chickens, and quickly, literally took over the local chicken market. This is 1957, 56, 57, and the local chickens were all kind of had a snot, a nasal drip, because they're running through open sewers and squat pots, very unsanitary conditions, and they all had these kind of low lingering infections in the chickens, in the indigenous chickens. Well, our chickens were clean. And so immediately dad, you know how those Latin American markets are, the farmers come in to the square, and everybody, well, dad quickly took all the market away from the local farmers. And of course, they immediately accused us of being witches, practicing voodoo and witchcraft. And of course, they never asked, how do you do this? They just figured it was something off normal. And so then in 1959, when there was a junta, a takeover, a rebellion, they took over. Pettis Jimenez got ousted. And what happens, Dr. Aaron, when a culture goes through catastrophe like that and lawlessness, it allows scores to be settled that wouldn't normally be settled, in normal times. And so this gave cover, if you will, for the local farmers to exercise their vengeance. And we fled the back door as the machine guns came in the front door and lost everything. Dad was 39, and he met with every government agent in Caracas, and nobody would give us the time of day, and so there wasn't anything to do but come back to the U.S. And so we got on a ship and came home, landed in Philadelphia Easter Sunday, June in 1961. And but Dad left his heart there. I think that's one of the reasons he died so young. He never got over it. That was his dream. He'd been there 12 years. He loved the culture, loved the people, loved how can you not love having bananas, papayas, and pineapples in your backyard, And so anyway, Mom and Dad were both from the Midwest, but we didn't go back there because Dad wanted to be within a day's drive of D.C. so that if things settled, we could be to D.C. in hours, sign papers, and be back to the farm of Venezuela, quickly. So that's why we didn't go back to the Midwest. And he started over here in Virginia, Shenandoah Valley, on the most worn out, gullied rock pile in the whole area. It was very cheap because it was completely worn out land. And that's how we started. So then the next question is, well, so how do I make money on this farm? And so we had different experts, both public and private, come and consult and try to tell us. And every one of them said, well, plant corn, buy chemical fertilizer, graze the wood lot, borrow more money, build silos, do the whole thing. Well, Dad knew that wasn't. He saw the chemical approach as basically a drug addiction. You got to get to get a hit, it takes more volume or more toxicity, and certainly more money for either, to get the same hit. And so basically, he took an off-farm job. Mom took an off-farm job. The off-farm job. Mom was a school teacher. Dad was an accountant, and he worked for a firm, doing tax work and bookkeeping work, and the off-farm jobs paid for the mortgage. Well, I got my first chickens when I was 10 and loved them, and I wanted to farm, and so I'm growing up now just loving the farm. I'm the one. There were three of us. My older brother was very mechanical, and he wanted to fly airplanes. So he, as soon as he could get away, he got away. My younger sister, was into sales and different things, and so she left as well. And so here I am, and I'm sitting here, in as a late teen. How do I start doing this farm thing? And so after college, I did a couple of years, off farm work, doing the living at home on farm, off farm commute until finally September 24, 1982. I walked out of I was an investigative reporter at the local newspaper, and walked out of the office and came back to the farm full time and never looked back. And so here we are.
So that's a really intriguing story. I think part of that, the thing that really intrigues me is how the place y'all moved in the Shenandoah Valley, how the topsoil had eroded away, but hundreds of years, and this is something you talk about in one of your, I forget where I've heard you talk about this, about the topsoil over there used to be amazing. It used to be this, amazing farmland that got worn away, and how you rebuilt the soil. Could you talk about that a little bit? Because, later on I want to dive into like soil health and human health and animal
Sure.
health, which is literally our health is interconnected with the ground. It's almost as if we came out of the dirt, kind of, sort of, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah.
so
So Governor Spotswood in what, 1740, something like that, He's getting colonial governors. This British colonial governor, 1740, and he's in Williamsburg, and he's concerned that the Scotch Irish and the Germans are coming down from the north down through into the valley, and the British are going to lose the Shenandoah Valley here on the other side of the Blue Ridge. So he has these buddies, about 10 of them. He dubs them the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe, and he dispatched them out to the valley to kind of do a bivouac and tell us what you find. And they wrote back. They said everywhere they rode in the valley, they could take the grass and tie it in a knot above the horse's saddle. It was a magnificent silvopasture maintained by the Native Americans with fire to bring in the bison, the elk, the deer, turkeys, and passenger pigeons and all that. And so here came the Germans, the Scotch Irish, and the British, and they were all coming from a very temperate environment, a very arable, temperate, gentle, rainfall, foggy kind of environment. And they came into the valley where, our rain in the summer comes in outbursts of thunderstorms, and a lot colder in the winter, a lot hotter in the summer, a lot drier in the summer. And so and the Holy Grail was grain, because grain was very, very expensive. That was the Holy Grail. And so they plowed up these deep soils, inverted them, took buried the vegetation and inverted the soil. And now when those heavy thunderstorms came, it started to wash away. And by the time we came in 1961, some 3 to 5 feet of soil had washed away, and we had large areas here. Large areas, a quarter acre, maybe not half an acre, but certainly quarter acre, like big saucers. Imagine big, tea saucers in the fields that were solid shale. All the soil had washed off. There was no grass, no weeds, no nothing. It was just solid shale. And I remember as a little child being able to walk the fields and never set foot on a piece of vegetation. It was that barren. And today, all those areas have about 14 inches of soil on them. Now it's not 3 feet, okay,
Yeah.
but the rocks are now buried under soil. It grows grass, and the productivity has changed dramatically. The fields, what used to be able to feed 10 cows now feeds 80. So it's a pretty big, pretty dramatic change.
Yeah. And one thing about soil health, I feel like a lot of people don't understand is the soil health directly correlates with the health of the animals that eat whatever grows in the soil, as well as which includes humans or humans eating cows that eat that stuff. There's a big ecosystem with bacteria, fungus that actually help extract minerals from the soil and put it into the grass and whatnot. Um, could you talk briefly about because building 14 inches of soil is it's hard making soil. It's not like you just go to Home Depot and grab some stuff. If you make the right stuff, it actually you need the right pH. You
Yeah.
need newer, you need bacteria. Could you talk about some of the because I think one thing we didn't mention is you actually went to I think it was Virginia Tech undergrad or
No, no, I was an English major. I went to liberal arts college, Bob Jones in South Carolina, Christian
okay.
liberal art school. Yeah.
Okay, I
Uh,
was
if I
thinking some,
if I'd have gone to Virginia Tech, I might have come out as crazy as the rest of them. But I went an alternative route.
that was a long time ago. But like the
Yeah.
whole soil issue with that, could
Yeah.
you talk about because
Sure.
ultimately when you make soil, you're doing a lot of carbon capture.
Yeah.
So could you talk? So I love it. I love it when you go from farm stuff to science because
Yeah.
I really love that. So could you just do a little change
Sure.
hats real quick and talk
Yeah.
about the science behind what you
Sure.
14 inches?
Sure, absolutely. So the way the planet works, if you will, is you got the sun up there. The sun is beaming down energy, solar energy, and it is captured by photosynthesis. Through chlorophyll in plants, is captured, and the plant then inhales uh, carbon dioxide and exhales oxygen. It splits off that carbon and turns it into cellulose, into actual material. I still just am completely enamored of the fact that something as mystical and esoteric as sunbeams can be captured by a plant and turned into something that's measurable, fungible, weighable, and physical. So the non-physical turns into something physical. Well, that physical then provides the energy for the soil microbial life, and every in healthy soil, every handful of healthy soil contains about 9 billion different, that's B with a B, 9 billion different microbial beings. And those beings, I like to think of it as, in Star Wars, where, when Luke Skywalker goes up there, he's trying to find a fast, interplanetary vehicle, and he runs into Han Solo. And over there in the corner, there's these like two-headed, all these aliens, playing in this band in the corner. And I envision the soil like that. You got all these billions and billions of beings, and they're trading. They come up to the rhizosphere that is the exudate around the edge of the root hair, and one of them comes up and says, "Hey, I got some molybdenum in my pocket. I'll trade you some molybdenum
Mm.
for some of that polysaccharide, a little of that sugar. Give me some of that sugar." So they make a trade. The plant gets molybdenum, and the microbe gets energy, and it goes and trades with something else. So you got these quadrillions and quadrillions of trade relationship, going on in the soil, and it's all driven by the carbon. This is the ultimate carbon economy,
Mm.
and so that carbon can either decompose, just decompose by microbes, or it can go through an animal and decompose through an animal. Of course, most of us are familiar with compost piles. That's a very rapid, carbon capture system, a microbial system. It works with microbes, the same thing. But all of this is, if you can capture and hold that carbon, either through manure or just on-site microbial breakdown. If you can hold that carbon on site, over time you build up biomass. That's the way it works. Excuse me. And what we saw was, over time, as we began increasing the fertility through direct carbon capture, by doing large scale composting, by doing controlled grazing. So we looked around the planet and said, well, how does soil develop? Soil doesn't. How did all this rich soil get here before there was 10-10-10 chemical fertilizer? And before John Deere tractors and all this stuff. And what you see is the pattern um, is perennials. It's not annuals. So annuals are plants that you got to plant all the time, like tomatoes and peppers and squash. Annuals are plants you don't have to plant all the time, like rhubarb and asparagus and grass and clover and things like that. So the perennials are the way that all those healthy soils are built, and the healthiest soils on the planet are under prairies with herbivores on top. The Serengeti in Africa, the American West, the Shenandoah Valley here. The herbivores, because grass actually is a more efficient metabolizer of sunbeams into biomass than trees and shrubs. And so the herbivores digest and convert this rapidly. Just imagine the digestion of a bird or a cow as being a very rapid compost pile. It's all digestion, but what happens inside of a digesting being is rapid composting.
Yeah.
So over the years, these rock piles gradually, they were just like a scab, and every year you'd see about 18 inches more, on the edge. The soil comes in 18 more inches next year, 18 more inches next year. And it took about 40 years, but eventually they all filled up with soil, and it's still thin, but very productive.
Yeah, I think one thing it's interesting what you said there. You talked about with the rhizomes, the plant roots, and bacteria create this to come to the air. It's really interesting how in my world we're using things like fulvic and humic acid now as a rare earth mineral trace supplement to help people with chronic health issues. but nature was actually doing the exact same thing because fulvic and humic acid are actually some of the acids that are made by these fungi that extract minerals out of the soil. So I think it's really intriguing to me to hear these little snippets and in my scientific brain to connect dots like, oh, maybe that's how fulvic acid and ultimately shilajit, which is basically
Yeah,
this exudate out of the
yeah,
Himalayan mountains, is, is
yeah.
is their version of over there. But ultimately, if you have plants with roots and all this stuff, you actually will get out from soil these molybdenum you mentioned, chromium, silica, barium, strontium, all these rare earth minerals that the animals that eat them need. And it's that just fascinates me. Um, so one thing, and I forget which one of your books you talked about, and you can correct the statistic because I read this probably 15 years ago, like something like 96 or 98 minerals, rare earth minerals that um, that ruminators need, that cows need, but yet grains only support something like 60 or 64 of those. Could you talk about that briefly about the difference between, allowing a cow to eat what a cow was made to eat versus giving them a grain just from a micronutrient perspective, like that whole process and what it does to the cow?
Yeah, well, the Bionutrient Food Association right now is really studying this whole question right now, and the one thing that they have found that the single most determining factor on whether an animal is has the most nutritional density in it is how many different plants did that animal eat. That's the single biggest determinant. Because here's the thing: all the plants, they have different enzymes, they have different mineral balances, they have different phytochemicals. I mean, dandelion concentrates calcium. There's just all sorts of things. Some of them obviously have deep tap roots. Some have spreader roots. Some like it. It's like some like it hot. Some like it cold. Some like it, um, uh, sunny. Some like to grow in the shade. So all these plants have very very different, um, nutrient profiles. And so if we want the highest phytochemicals, then we need to make sure that the animals are getting access to plants to, to green plants. That's where the phytochemicals are. What we call the salad bar, and so whether it's our chickens or cows or pigs or whatever, the whole idea is to move them consistently on fresh forages, on fresh green material. So not only do they get moved away from yesterday's excrement because they're not potty trained, so it keeps them cleaner, but they're also moved onto a fresh salad bar every day. So they ingest the greatest variety of all these things. If you get a cookbook from like Dolly Madison or Martha Washington, George Washington's wife, what you see there is about 80% of the stuff in there, we don't even know what they are. Currant berries, all these weird things. Because back in the day, they didn't have Walmart. And so they had all these different seasoned, fruits and vegetables and things throughout the season that they could eat. I mean, Australian, the Aborigines of Australia routinely in a year would eat more than 1,000 different kinds of foods. Americans eat about 30. That's it. We just eat about 30. And so one of the quickest ways to get more variety in your diet is to eat an animal that has consumed a lot of variety in its diet.
Mm.
So if a cow's just eating, corn silage, that's a very undiversified diet. But if the cow is eating plantain and chicory and uh, clover and different grasses and barnyard grass and Johnson grass and white clover and red clover and all sorts of different things, that complexity, that enzyme and nutrient complexity, is going to show up in all that structure, and the same way with the chicken and everything else. And then that's what happens then with the omega 3 omega 6 balance. And I mean, it's like grass finished beef has 300% more riboflavin in it than grain fed. We submitted our eggs to to a lab several years ago with 11 other pastured egg producers in the country. The official USDA nutrition label on eggs in the store, that label will say it has 48 micrograms of folic acid per egg, and our eggs averaged 1,038 micrograms per egg.
A thousand.
Yeah, yeah, and that's just one I remember. There were, there's
Yeah.
measured about 10 other things. They're all in the book, folks. This ain't normal. But the point I'm making is that 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 diet of the animal has a direct bearing on the on the balance and the variety and the strength, if you will, of the egg, the meat, the whatever it is. And the same with tomatoes and peppers and everything else. As we simplify everything to just NPK, chemical fertilizer, and just a monocrop, a monoculture, when we simplify it, we really reduce our microbiome's ability to access the diversity that it needs. Our microbiome studies now are all showing, if there's one thing they all agree on, it's you got to have diversity. You can't just put one thing down there and expect it to work. And our animals are the same way.
Yeah, that's really intriguing. What you said, that folic acid thing, because a prenatal vitamin that you give to a pregnant female or when someone's getting pregnant, they have 800 to 1,000 micrograms of folic acid in them. And literally, your egg has measured more folic acid than a prenatal vitamin, which, maybe we don't need to, fortify our food system
Yeah,
with folic acid. Maybe we just need to let chickens do their
yeah,
thing and
yeah,
make eggs that have enough folic acid. That's an interesting number just to put away in my head.
yeah.
One thing about chickens I want to talk about, my dad's from West Virginia and he grew up on a farm. And I remember listening to him tell stories about, oh, we put the arsenic in the chicken feed but we take it out, 7 days before they get processed because, well, they're safe then. And the big producers, voluntarily removed arsenic from the feed, what was it, 2012, whatever.
Hmm.
Um, could you talk about that a little bit? Because like when I first learned about that, like all these things went off my head. Because I remember eating chicken when I was a kid, and my dad always overcooked it, but the tendons always had this red streaking to them. But now I know actually, and I thought it was undercooked, but now I know it was actually arsenic deposition in the tissues. Which, when you say it like that, people are like, there's no, you can't make this stuff up, right? Like, could you talk about a
Well,
little bit about that? A real
yeah,
chicken. When I talk about real food, real chicken versus fake chicken, part of that process when I talk to patients is a real chicken doesn't have arsenic or mercurial arsenates or aluminum, basically stuff put in their
yeah.
feces to prevent the smell. Could you talk a little bit about like how a typical chicken is processed, just so people can wrap their brain around it?
Oh my. Well, if if you've ever walked into a Tyson chicken factory, you'll never forget it. First of all, you can't breathe. Those chickens are breathing in fecal particulate every single day. They actually are living in their toilet, and of course, and they're way closer to the ground than we are. And so that fecal particulate comes in, and it's like sandpaper in their respiratory tract. So that sandpaper abrades their tender mucous membranes and creates these lesions along their respiratory tract, which then allows the fecal particulate to get right into the bloodstream. And this is how you get things like salmonella in eggs. How can it get it in eggs? Egg is removed. The oviduct is removed from the bloodstream, but if it goes through that biological barrier, it can actually go right into the egg. So that's eggs. Of course, broilers raise 20,000 in a house, that sort of thing, and they feed them everything you can imagine. The only question the industry asks is, can we grow them fatter, faster, bigger, cheaper? And they view. I think I would be remiss if I didn't just jump on the soapbox a moment and point out that the industrial food system views life as a fundamentally inanimate thing, a mechanical thing, whereas we view life as a fundamentally biological thing, and those two different worldviews or ideas. If life is fundamentally mechanical, then you go down one direction. If life is fundamentally biological, you go down a different direction. And the industrial food system absolutely thinks life is fundamentally mechanical. We can switch around the DNA. We can go into this amazing, mystical thing, like a bunch of conquistadors, swashbuckling sailors, and manipulate it however we want to manipulate it, without regard to any humility of it being fearfully and wonderfully made, and way beyond anything that we can imagine. So that's where we are. And so on our farm, we don't put anything in the feed that's, I mean, we use all genetically modified, organism free, GMO free, local grains. And they get access to the pasture, and we move them every day. We move them every day to a new spot on the pasture, so that they are stimulated to eat a lot of grass. We either mow or graze with the cows ahead of the shelters, so the grass is short. Chickens like short grass. They don't like long grass. They can't masticate long grass like a cow. And so we want to keep the grass short for the chickens. We do everything. We move them first thing in the morning, at daybreak. Chickens are the first animals up. They're hungry, and in the industry, they leave lights on them all night, so the chickens never sleep. They just keep eating and eating and eating and never sleep. We don't have lights on them out in the field, so they actually rest and can sleep. So I think one of the most interesting things that we've learned from the restaurants that we service over the years is that all of our meat and poultry, and this is not an advertisement. I'm just telling you a fact, because we've done the same. We found the same thing here when our chef started telling us about it. That our poultry and meat cooks about 15% faster than what's in than the industrial counterpart. And so you say, well, how could that be? Why would that be 15 to 20% faster cooking? And the only thing that we can figure is that our animals don't secrete adrenaline throughout their life. In the industrial system, the animals are they're disrespected for their nobody's asking how to make a happy pig. It's just how can we grow it faster, fatter, bigger, cheaper, and so life is fundamentally disrespected for its distinctive physiological glory, if you will. And then they're crammed in these spaces. They have to cut the tails off the pigs, so they'll be tender, and in these terrible situations, the pigs won't eat each other. They'll run away from each other instead. So everything is stressed. It's socially stressed. It's emotionally stressed. And so what happens when you stress? You drip adrenaline. That's how a 100-pound mom can pick a car up off her 3-year-old toddler, right? What happens is your muscles tense up. When you weight lift or you run a race, your muscles get tense with that adrenaline, the adrenaline that's being secreted. And so in the industry, all the animals are coming in under a very stressful condition and secreting this adrenaline, whereas ours are all happy and unstressed, and so they don't have that adrenaline secretion, and they cook faster. So the obvious question is, can you eat happiness? And I suggest yes. You can choose to either eat happiness or eat abuse. And I would, and without going too far off the rails
Yeah.
here, it doesn't seem too far off to me to think that if you're eating food that was disrespected, it might make your microbiome disrespect you, and maybe make you disrespect others. And if you're eating food that was respected for its physiological uh, difference, that maybe you'll have a little more respectful attitude as well.
Yeah, I think one thing you've said in one of your books somewhere. Again, I read your books quite some time ago, actually over a decade ago. But respecting the cows of a cow or chickenness of the chicken, respecting like how they grow in nature, and just augmenting that creates better animals. But it was really interesting. I was reading a research article maybe about 12 years ago, and I was talking about women who eat chicken have an increased risk of getting urinary tract infections. And when I first read that, I didn't really know how to wrap it around my head. But later on, I learned, well, with all the E. coli and the fecal microbial contents from them breathing their own
Uh
feces,
huh.
that even after they process the chickens and wash them with bleach, there's still so much E. coli on a chicken that if you eat it, and you're a female, you have an increased risk for getting a urinary tract infection, which, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's absolutely bonkers. And when we
Mhm.
started having our own animals here and getting our own chickens and processing, one of the things I noticed was that you're making bone broth, and the bones of the store bought chicken after one round of bone broth, they fall apart in your hands, and the bones of pasture chickens are thicker.
Yeah.
Just the
Hmm.
structure of the animal is radically different. But I have a quick question for you, and this is actually something one of my patients kind of told me, and I did not know the answer to it. But this is kind of a country story. But one of the friends, one of the friends was like, you have the big Tyson's, chicken
Hmm.
chicken things, and they're always all white chickens, right?
Yeah.
And so it was one of those accidents where the truck crashed and the chickens were everywhere. So he just stopped and grabbed three chickens and took them home because they're going to be eaten by foxes and whatever. So he took them home and threw them with the rest of his chickens. But over time, the white chickens actually started to get color, and actually different color developed different colors on their feathers and stuff. And so I was really like taken back. I'm like, what is it that those chickens were white their entire life, and then when they start eating and grazing, their colors change? Do you have any idea about that, or have any insight? Because I'm like, it's got to be something like either they're eating or not eating, or what would that just was a bizarre concept to me to think about.
Yeah, that is bizarre. Uh, probably, I think it probably had more to do with age. Kind of like graying hair,
Okay,
than it did with what they were eating. I mean, as far as I know, all color is based on breed, on
yeah,
what's the genetics. What is it? Red chicken, black chicken, yellow
yeah,
chicken, white chicken. But a lot of these fast growing Cornish cross that the industry uses, they actually come they actually have some buff colored in their
yeah.
background, and as they age, they'll their feathers will change. I don't think those white chickens became black.
No, no, no. They develop like
they, they,
different
they,
real
yeah,
those brown colors.
they just got a little more earth tone,
Yeah,
color, if you will, and that could have been the difference between your hair color and my hair color.
fair enough. Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting. When you talk about real food, and I talk to patients about this all the time. I don't just the concept of real food sounds super simple, but when you talk about a chicken, all of a sudden we're talking about two like different creatures, a natural pastured chicken versus a CAFO, a contained animal feeding operation type chicken.
Yeah.
Um, whether it's the arsenic in the feed, which is now taken away, but they still use aluminum ash they'll put down for the first weeks or two of life to minimize ammonia because it would kill the little baby chicks. Like all these things we do ultimately affect the the quality of the meat of the animal that we put in our mouth. I want to talk about cows briefly as well, like the cows of a cows, because I think a lot of people don't quite understand the difference between like a contained animal feeding operation standard, Cisco kind of cow versus a grass-fed, grass-finished cow. I want to talk about that briefly, and then one of the things you do is rotational grazing. How having
Hmm.
the cow eat like microgreens, which tend
Yeah.
to be nutrient. It's like spring greens, right? It's eating really nutrient dense stuff. You talk briefly about respecting the cows of cow, moving them around. Because in nature, the cows, well, if they need selenium, they'll find fescue or grass that's got more selenium in it or whatever the mineral they need. They'll actually find it. Could you talk briefly about that respect of how the animals were designed or made and how that affects ultimately the quality of the fillet, the beef, the hamburgers that we ultimately put in our bodies?
Yeah, sure. What are herbivores for? You cows are herbivores. So are sheep. And as you know, herbivores have gotten some pretty bad press lately. They're going to burp and fart, and we're all going to be dead in 30 years. Because of these cows. And and so you look around and you say, well, what's the role of herbivores? Well, the role of herbivores is to take grass that 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 starts slowly and then speeds up and then goes into senescence. It's to prune it, just like a viticulturist would prune grapevines or an orchardist would prune an apple tree, not to kill it, but to stimulate new, fresh, abundant growth. So the pruning of the grass stimulates new, fresh, abundant growth on the grass when it is done at the right time, not when it's too tall, not when it's too low, but at the right time. The Goldilocks point there. And so when you look around the planet, how does this, you know, how does nature control these herbivores? So they don't overgraze or undergraze, and they're at the right time. And it does it with basically three ideas. One is the animals are moving all the time; they don't stay in the same place, so they're going on to fresh ground. Number two, they're mobbed up, and that's because of predators. So the predator prey uh, makes the herbivores mob up, which then makes them graze more aggressively, and they graze less discriminatorily. If they happen to have if they get a weed with the grass, well, okay, I'll just take the weed too, because there's a thousand animals behind me that if I don't eat this right now, they're going to eat it, and so you get this much more aggressive, non-discriminatory eating. Like I like to compare it between taking your beloved out to a 10-year anniversary dinner at a nice white tablecloth restaurant. You might sit there, for 2 hours and enjoy this wonderful, nice meal and talk about, I wonder where the chicken came from, or the wine, or all this stuff, as opposed to a bunch of new Marine recruits at Camp Lejeune that just came in off a 10-mile run, and are getting ready to go on the range. They got 20 minutes to eat lunch, and nobody's going to ask, I wonder where the chicken came from. I wonder where the beets came from. Nobody's going to ask, right? And so that's what we're looking for in the herbivores, and it's actually good for them because they actually eat more variety. They eat more diversified by having this. So they're moving, they're mobbed up, and then they're mowing. They're not eating. They're not eating all the stuff that is. I mean, cows are the dumping ground for broken ho-ho cakes, and Nestle's chocolate, and donuts, and all sorts of bakery waste and different things are fed to cows as a way to clean it up. And so they're mowing. They're eating forages. And so when we mimic that, moving, mobbing, mowing, how do we do that on a domestic scale with livestock? We do it with electric fence. So electric fence becomes a steering wheel, accelerator, and a brake on that four-legged pruning sauerkraut vat, and she moves across the landscape, and we can steer her just like a zero-turn mower across the landscape, so that she and the forages interact at exactly the same time. The point I'm making is that if you violate any one of those three, moving, mobbing, or mowing, if you violate any one of those three, you turn the herbivore from an asset and a soil builder and an ecology facilitator into a liability. And the ugly truth is that 95% of all the domestic livestock herbivores on the planet violate at least one, and some violate all three of those, which then makes movies like, Cowspiracy and What the Health, and all those kinds of things, and stimulates those kind of movies. So when they're disparaging the conventional industrial food system, I'm saying, amen, amen. But the answer is not veganism. The answer is to change the production model so that the animals do respect and honor the moving, mobbing, mowing that we see as a pattern in nature.
Yeah, I think one thing is interesting about that as well, and the whole respecting the cows of a cow thing. When you feed a cow grain, what happens when you give the world's most amazing ruminator, that can turn undigestible grass into milk and dairy and all kinds of great things? What happens when you feed them green? They make alcohol in their guts, and ultimately that creates a pre-diabetic cow. It makes the marbling of their muscles worse. People think, oh, marbling. I'm like, if you catch a deer, if you go out and go hunting, you find fat around the liver, you find fat around the kidneys. You don't
Yeah.
find, we have to act. It's not a natural thing to find. In humans, we call that inclusion body disease. We call it fatty liver disease. We call it, new term is metabolic associated, steatohepatitis. In cows, we're like, ooh, yummy. And it's like just something simple as the grain creates a healthy, nutrient dense cow into a pre-diabetic thing. That's no wonder when you have this, the literature says all red meat's associated with heart disease because you're eating a pre-diabetic sick cow. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, on that score, it's interesting that in Argentina, where the per capita consumption of red meat is nearly 200 pounds a year. Think about that. The average at Uruguay, it is 200 pounds a year. Argentina is more like 160. But anyway, red meat. The U.S. per capita consumption of red meat is about is about 50, 52 pounds a year. So we're talking about 3 to 4 times the red meat consumption that we have here in the U.S. And they say, oh, red meat's going to cause colon cancer and all this stuff. Well, those cultures have way less than half the colon cancer rate of the U.S., even though they're eating all that red meat. Well, why? Because they don't grain feed. They're grass finished, which makes the meat have high levels of conjugated linoleic acid. Conjugated linoleic acid, otherwise known as CLA, is a structural anti-carcinogen, and but it does a lot of other things too. But it only takes 2 weeks of grain feeding an herbivore for all the CLA to leave. That's how vulnerable it is. And your grain feeding makes acidosis in the gut. So this is interesting. Cornell University did a study several years ago, and where they took cows in a feedlot, fed them hay, and what they found was that if they took cows off of grain 2 weeks before slaughter, that they did not have the highly pathogenic E. coli of their grain-fed counterparts. Well, why? Well, because as you kind of alluded to, when you feed grain, it raises the pH, the acid in the rumen, and so the rumen, instead of being neutral, becomes acidic. Well, then the E. coli, which is a digestive microbe, they have to have E. coli to digest. The E. coli then, instead of being adapted to a 7.0, pretty much a balanced pH, it now becomes acclimated to a much more acidic pH. They actually adapt to the different climatic situation. So then, if we happen to ingest some E. coli because there's a speck of something somewhere that didn't get washed off, if we ingest it, instead of our highly acidic stomach killing that E. coli, that adapted highly acidic E. coli from the grain-fed cow kills us, and that's the problem. So Cornell isolated this. They found out. They said basically, if we would only feed cows forage for their last 2 weeks, there would be no E. coli problem or contamination in the beef supply. And of course, the big grain outfits poo-pooed them, said, you messed up the research, blah, 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 blah. And of course, it won't be done. But that's how simple some of this stuff is. And when you realize how we've convoluted these things, and instead of just doing that, instead, we spray chlorine on the carcasses. We mist the slaughterhouse with chlorine. We all this stuff, and then when you get your beef, you got some chlorine on there. I mean, we've had customers that actually get a rash up their arm when they touch store-bought meat, because it's got so much chlorine on it.
Yeah.
And so we take something that has real easy, very simple answers, and we turn it into something that's difficult.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you mentioned the microbiome, the human microbiome briefly before, and the bacteria in the soil. But it's really interesting. There's one of the advanced lab tests I do on patients for the risk for heart disease is from Cleveland Heart Labs, and it's a thing called a TMAO lab. And if that level is elevated, it's associated with an increased risk for heart disease. Well, the interesting thing is the TMO is created by bacteria in the human GI tract as it breaks down carnitine, which is an amino acid usually found in red meat and eggs. But the issue with the risk for heart disease in humans, based on this information, is not as much the red meatness per se, but it's actually the bacteria in your gut, which ultimately come from what you eat. That's either eats the
Yeah.
soil or fermented the
Yes.
soil or whatever. So it's this massive circle of like, if you have really healthy soil, there's a book actually called Soil and Health. Sir Albert Howard wrote it. It was a great
Yeah.
read.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
almost 100 years ago. It's like
Yeah.
healthy
Right.
soil equals healthy animals equals healthy humans. And so, just to wrap this section up real quick, it's like when I say real food, we've talked about chickens and cows for 40 minutes, right? And great science, went around the world, went to Argentina. But when we say real food, it sounds super simple, but it's hard to do today when everything is so processed, you know, just to eat real food.
Well, uh, oh, I mean, yes and no. I mean, so what's the number one thing somebody can do to to develop their? I mean, besides besides living a purposeful life and forgiving people that you hate, those kind of things. But once you get past that and you go to diet, you go to what do you eat? What you want to eat is food that you can pronounce. You don't want to eat anything that you can't pronounce. And so Michael Pollan in
Yeah.
when he writes about this, he says we probably the cutoff point is about 1900. If it wasn't available before 1900, you probably shouldn't eat it. And of course, we can all be thankful that hot dogs were introduced at the 1890 World Fair. So they just crept in under the radar. But you want to find unprocessed whole foods and get in your kitchen. The biggest the biggest lie that people kind of seem to buy into is I can have a different result but not make any changes. And and the fact is you can't have a different result without making changes. So you can't expect to change your health trajectory if you continue eating, happy meals and takeout. You've got to change your trajectory, and that means participating in the food system. So I'm gonna say it right here. Get in your kitchen. You've got to start enjoying domestic culinary arts. Now, fortunately, we live in a very special time where where you don't have to take a wooden bucket to the spring and dip water. You don't have to put wood in a stove till you can get hot water. You don't, we've got refrigerators and time bake and Instapots and crock pots and bread makers and ice cream makers and KitchenAid and slicers and dashers and swishers and all sorts of cool stuff. I mean, hot and cold running water. I mean, we got. I mean, great grandma would have given her eye teeth for the kind of gadgetry we have. So use it, enjoy
Yeah.
it. Cooking from scratch has never been easier. Think about what your great grandmother had to do to cook from scratch. I mean, she had to grow it, then she had to, um, you know, uh, peel it, dice it, take care of it. She had to fetch water from the spring. She had to put wood in the cook stove. All the
Yeah.
my lands. You don't even have to grow it. You can just buy it from good farmers, and you're up and running. And just use your kitchen to prepare, preserve, package, and process your own food, and come and disentangle from that systemic industrial agenda. And I will say that it's um, good food has never been as easy to get now. I mean, man, when we started back, 50 years ago, there were very few alternatives to the industrial food supply. Now there's community supported agriculture, there's farmers
Yeah.
markets, there's people like us that ship around the country. We deliver to Richmond, every month, and
Yep.
I mean we it's very accessible, way more accessible now than it was even 20 years ago.
But what I'm hearing you say, it just takes the people being engaged. People need
Yes.
to learn. People need to look. One of the things I tell my patients often, I say when I'm interviewed other places, it took me like a year, and when I started down this journey, it took me about a year and a half to to source all my stuff because I didn't know where to buy. Now, obviously, we have this thing called Fall Line Farms here in Central Virginia that we just do. I mean, order stuff every week, and you have your drop off in Richmond once a month. You make some really good pork, by the way. Especially your bacon is really
Uh,
yummy.
yeah.
It's really good stuff. I want to transition right here a little bit. Real food, eat real food. Drop this little statistic: 80% of chronic disease in our country can directly be related to eating processed food. So, literally, eating real food has the potential to eliminate 80% of chronic illnesses in our country. But there's a bigger issue, and part of that is the food industry. And I think I want to, your book you wrote, Everything I Want to Do is Illegal. I think, really hits the point of how the government, how laws and regulations limit, someone selling things they raise, and raw milk in Virginia is still illegal.
Yeah.
The raw milk that I get, that I used to make homemade yogurt with and kefir, and is it's actually illegal for me. My wife's actually in LA right now at a conference, and she sent me a picture of raw milk she could get from in California.
Yeah.
We in Virginia. So on that on that little kind of strange, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is that let's talk about I'm gonna use the book. Everything I want to do is illegal because it's a great title. Um,
Yeah.
about things challenges you've run into, whether it's the chickens, the way you process chickens. Can we talk about some of the limitations that were placed on you that you had to overcome
Yeah.
just in order to create good quality food for people to eat?
Yeah. So one of the big battles that we had that we eventually won, but it was a battle nonetheless. Was to maintain our open air chicken processing. We process chickens during the summer, not in the winter, and we do it 2 or 3 days a week in an open air shed with a concrete floor and a you know a big holding tank to handle the processing water and everything. And the government came in and said that it was illegal. We couldn't do it that way. And interestingly, we had just had a lab report of colony forming units of bacteria per milliliter from our chicken, and we had taken chlorine drenched chicken out of the supermarket and had it done at the same lab at the same time, so we'd have real good comparison. And the store bought, the federal inspected chicken averaged 3,600 colony forming units of bacteria per milliliter. Ours averaged 133. So we were 25 times cleaner than what was in the store. And these inspectors are standing there saying, this is inherently unsanitary. You can't open air. If you butcher in the open air, it's unsanitary, and a fly might come in, blah blah blah. And I'm showing this report. Well, what we really want clean food, or do we want a bunch of concrete and stainless steel and paperwork? And so these are the kinds of things that when people say, "Oh, we need more inspectors," we know, no, 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 no. They the food, what I call the food police, the food regulations are extremely scale prejudicial. They're much easier to jump through if you're big than if you're small. And I say that that's an inherently unfair regulation. If it's easier to comply when you're big than when you're small, it's inherently unfair. And so you would think that if our chickens were 25 times cleaner than what was in the store when they were harassing us, they would have said, hey, hey, let's stop the presses, hold the processing plants. We're Virginia. We're gonna stop all this until people can really get good food, or get cleaner chicken. But no, I said, well, what else are you interested in besides just whether it's clean or not? Well, you got to have bathrooms. I said, bathrooms? I got two in my house. Mom's got two in her house. They're 50 and 60 feet away. If I want to go number one, I just step behind the tractor. What's the big deal? And and they said, well, you got to have changing lockers for your employees. And back at the time, I don't have any employees. It's just us. We're right out, in the back. And so these are the kinds of things that stymie. So when people complain about centralized food systems and the fact that four companies control 85% of America's meat supply, think about that. Four companies, four brands control 85% of America's meat supply. And when people wonder about this centralization, that centralization is there not because there aren't a bunch of people like me that would like to access the market or produce it differently. It's because complying with the food police, the food regulations, are so onerously expensive that it's extremely difficult for an entrepreneur to launch a competitor into the marketplace. Young new businesses have to be launched embryonically. Babies are born little; they're not born as adults. And if a baby's too big, it's too big to be birthed. And this is the problem: is with all this regulatory requirement around being able to make food, you can't do it. We had a great gal here. She was a graduate of the Culinary Institute of America, and she wanted to do chicken pot pies. We had customers. Our customers would love to have more really good convenience food. One of our jokes is that what our customers really want is is real food hot pockets. If they could do that, that's really so. I'm saying, hey, let's do chicken pot pie. So we start looking into it, and the first thing we need is an inspected kitchen. Well, the inspected kitchen has to have an inspected bathroom. The inspected bathroom has to have an inspected leach field. It can't be a composting toilet. And if the cook wants to walk to our house and use our bathroom, that's unacceptable. It has to be attached. And before you know it, you're into $100,000-$200,000 just in minimal infrastructure, just just to be able to have a structure where you can make chicken pot pies. Well, it's one thing to have that kind of requirement if you're making $1 million worth of pot pies. It's another thing if you're trying to launch. You don't know if they're going to sell. You don't know if you can make money on it. It's all an experiment. It's a trial. But in order to experiment, you've got to lay out all this for the infrastructure and the regulatory compliance. And so I could go on at length. I wrote a book documenting all this. Everything I want to do is illegal. Documenting the kind of things that we either don't do or wish we could do because the entry level requirement is so scale prejudicial that at an embryonic stage, at a stage that could actually birth competition in the marketplace, it's not big enough to pay for all of the prejudicial requirements.
Yeah. And I remember, and I don't actually, this might be from our, because we actually get raw milk. And it was really interesting because the whole colony forming units, just for a quick little snippet, like when, as a medical doctor, that's one of the ways we actually measure infections. Like someone has a UTI, we'll do a urine culture and the things are fed back in colony forming units. And so it was really interesting that 3,000, the number you get, 3,600 number you gave is, for urinary tract infection, the number is, 10,000 or above is considered to be elevated unless there's some nuances to
Mhm,
that, but
mhm.
like 3,600 is not much below 10,000, right? And that's just, and that's after it's been bleached in the store.
Yeah,
And with raw milk, it was interesting. Our local farmer, had something very similar. They got shut down, and their raw milk had these things called somatic cell counts, and they had like less
yeah.
than 100 in their raw milk. Would you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I feel like that's something else that people don't realize, that my wife lovingly calls it pus milk, which is the stuff you get in the store versus, the stuff you get from your farmer. Like how,
Yeah, well, just remember the somatic cell count is a measure of the kind of mammary infection, if you will, and so the somatic cells are like our, I guess, white blood cells or whatever. They indicate that the body's fighting an infection here. And so the dairy industry has somatic cell count benchmarks that you have to meet. But the beauty of pasteurization is your somatic cell count can be pretty high, and you just cook them out and you kill them. So you're drinking a bunch of pus from the killed somatic cells. Whereas in a raw milk deal, they're not killed, and so the somatic cell counts are way, 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 way lower than they are in a pasteurized setting where you have this cooking, this what's called a kill step in order to sterilize everything. Just remember, I think this is maybe a good point to bring out. Food should not be sterile. It should
Mhm.
not be sterile. Um, if food won't decompose, it won't digest. And so, if you go into your kitchen and you take squeezable Velveeta cheese and you squeeze it on the table, it'll sit there for a year. It won't change. It won't do it. It'll just sit there for a year. But if you put real cheese on your table, in 2 days it'll get fuzzy, and in a week it'll sprout legs and walk off your table. That is a decomposable material. And what we've done to our food system, we're so antimicrobial and we're so paranoid of living things that we have bathed everything in sterility, so that it comes to us in a non composable thing. I mean, ultra processed. What's the whole point? What's the whole point of the industrial food system? Is to extend shelf life. How long can we keep this on a shelf? And that includes special, special coverings for fresh produce and all sorts of things. How long can we preserve this? And and um, and what that does, all of that mentality has the consequence of reducing its ability to rot. If food won't rot, it won't digest. And I got to tell you this story. I was out in California doing a presentation for a school system for a bunch of middle schoolers, and this school district had procured a farm. They had these two farm ladies that were running this farm. It was like a 3-acre farm, small, but they incorporated the farm into the biology and the science curriculum. I think even the English teachers. It was a very comprehensive program. It was wonderful. So I got to go out and visit the farm. They told me this story. They were trying to introduce the students to worms and the how wonderful worms are. So they made a worm box. It was like 8 feet long, 3 feet wide, 3 feet deep. An oversized coffin kind of thing. And they had all this compost, all these red wiggler worms in there. And so they had an assignment for the kids. They said, okay, tomorrow I want you all to bring food. So the next day the kids brought food. They brought red. They brought gummy bears and you know whatever refined sugar snacks and bleached flour bread and they put and so the ladies they put that in one side and the two farm ladies they put in an apple and a little piece of T-bone steak and these things. Next week, the kids come out. They've been all prepped for this. They run up the hill. They open the box, and they open it up, and there's their Cheerios and gummy bears and all their foods over here. The worms hadn't touched it. Over here on this end, where the ladies had put in their real food, it was all digested. And so the obvious question for the kids that the teachers asked was, well, why would you want to eat something worms won't even eat? And I mean, it was like a bomb went off in those kids' heads. They realized, oh, worms are, worms know a lot more than I do. And it was a really poignant, a poignant learning lesson.
Actually, in college, I inadvertently did a similar experiment when I was, I believe, a junior. It was our apartment was pretty messy, and we had some Wonder Bread from the Wonder Bread
Ah,
factory, which is right downtown from where I went to school at VCU, and it was left out. And over a month, the bread was still there. It did not disappear.
yeah.
It didn't mold. Nothing ate it. And then we had also a bowl of beans, and
Uh-huh.
they basically got flies and got worm. That bowl actually disappeared over a month, and it was kind of
Uh-huh.
like, you know, really kind of intriguing. But I want to talk about seed oils really briefly because I
Mhm.
think in our food system, seed oils has become popular, and people are talking about how seed oils are how they're bad for your metabolism, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think people realize that seed oils and hydrogenated oils and partially solidified oils actually part of what they do is they block the degradation process of food. Like they don't rot, like you said. And one of the things that happens when you ingest this stuff, it actually messes up our own metabolism and our own gut microbiome, which is really important for our health. Could you talk about oils a little bit, like processed oils, really? Because ultimately, cows make healthy saturated fat. They make butyrate. They actually make these things that are actually healthy for us versus processed oils, like how those interplay with health.
Yeah, well, for sure. And that's one of the reasons why one of the best things that you can do on you might have a disagreement, but when you have something that's like a result of chronic toxicity, is to fast. Just let your body just wash it out. Clean it out. So um, the seed the a couple things. One is that as as we feed, let's take soybean meal. Um, there's a big difference between, for example, whole roasted soybeans that maintain all the oils in them and the fats versus soybean meal if you're going to feed an animal. And it's like saying, well, I'm not gonna eat corn on the cob because we make high fructose corn syrup out of corn. Things happen when you break it apart.
Yeah.
When you press it, you break it apart for the hydrogenated oils, for cooking oils, and that sort of thing. So as you know, there is a difference in a hierarchy. Like the worst oil in the world is like canola oil. Canola was developed by the Germans as a lubricant for diesel engines. Okay, and then we decided to make margarine out of it and start eating it. Um, and you go along. Then you got your peanut oil, coconut oil, palm oil, and you have your better ones. So or different ones, and then olive oil, all that. So I think that the key here is if you're feeding grains like we do in a commercial livestock in an omnivore, cows aren't getting grain, but birds and pork, they do need the carbohydrate. They're omnivores. They have a totally different digestive system than a herbivore, and so they do get grain. But the key there is whole grains, and obviously it helps to have them GMO free, and a lot of green material. It is the green material that carries in the body's ability, the phytochemicals, the carotenes, to be able to balance out the omega 3, omega 6 in the Greek poultry systems. There have been numerous studies showing the difference between when a chicken, for example, can get green material and when a chicken can't get green material. And when you take away fresh air, sunshine, and exercise too, and you don't let them have a salad bar, it's a completely sedentary thing. So just think about it. We say you are what you eat, but you also are what you eat eats, and you become like what you eat. So here we are in these massive confinement animal feeding operations, denying fresh air, denying exercise, denying sunlight, and then denying any green material. Well, is it any wonder that that is going to come to us as a food item? I love it's not real. It's not an authentic food item. There's nothing about that represents the chickenness of the chicken. It's all a disrespectful adulteration of the chickenness of the chicken, and we're now eating that, and and we're adulterating ourselves. It's
Yeah.
like you quoted Sir Albert Howard earlier. He wrote in an agricultural testament. He said, when you use artificial manures, that's what he called chemical fertilizers.
Yeah.
Artificial manures, it makes artificial plants that grow artificial animals, that make artificial people that can only be kept alive by using artificials. Boy, and that was written in 1950. Talk about prescient, huh?
Well, I mean, I guess, right now with all the pharmaceutical stuff and drug stuff and all the things going on, those are artificials. Those are
Yeah,
synthetic things we're making
that's
to
right.
keep us alive. That's very prophetic in that way. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't realize he said that point. That's cool. So one of the things I realized, and this is going back a little bit, this was during when President Obama was president, and some people may remember this, the Taxageddon. That was this big, there's always a big thing going on in DC. And one of the things that was going to happen is the farm bill wasn't going to go through. And they were starting to talk about, oh my gosh, milk will be, and this was whatever, this was a long time ago. This was like maybe at this stage, maybe 12 years ago.
Mhm.
Eggs are going to be $6 a dozen. A gallon of milk is going to be $8 a gallon. And this light bulb went off in my head. I'm like, wait a second, that's kind of what I'm paying now for my stuff from my local farmer. And I had this, and when right, and when the pandemic hit, I never ran out of eggs. I never ran out of beef. I never ran out of stuff because I was already sourcing it from within the Central Virginia area and getting stuff from Virginia, basically. Could you talk a little bit about like how like things like the farm bill and how like these government plans actually make it one harder for you to do your job and provide, but also decreases people's access to real food because we only want to buy the cheapest of the cheap of the cheap, which basically is government subsidized food. So it's basically we're eating government food. When you subsidize soy, corn, it affects the animals, it affects
Yeah.
eggs, it affects like
Hmm.
literally our entire food system.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just realize. I mean, you just mentioned the the other foodstuffs. and just realize that there are six things that the farm that are that the federal government there are six things the federal government has decided to subsidize and protect and ensure. Six things: corn, soybeans, wheat, rice, sugar cane, and cotton. Now, five of those are edibles, and one unless you want to eat cotton. But cotton is the only non-edible one. The other five are edible. But when those get special subsidy, concession, protection, whatever you want to call it, it completely skews the marketplace, the actual value in the marketplace. And then when you have all these food regulations that incentivize Tyson and de-incentivize somebody like us, it makes it makes competition very difficult in the marketplace. In fact, a lot of the cost of smaller scale local food is not because it's more expensive to grow it that way. It's because the compliance to the one size fits all food police is inordinately more expensive because you don't move around as many things. Like we co-own a small federal inspected slaughterhouse here where we do our pigs and chickens and pigs and cows and lambs, and it costs us roughly $600 for example, a steer carcass, to fabricate it, get it into packages. Costs us $600 to do what JBS or Tyson does for less than $100. We actually pay our people very well. It's a small plant, but we have the same compliance paperwork. We have this as a plant that's a thousand times our size, and so we can't spread those overheads across as many pounds of material. So that creates an inordinate price, and then you have the whole cheapness in the marketplace or in the production phase, where you cram all these animals in a house and you give them antibiotics and everything to keep them alive. And I don't know whether you know that Chick-fil-A had an 8 year. We're going to go antibiotic free, in 8 years. That was about 6 years ago, and 3 months ago they just announced can't be done. We're not doing it. We're abandoning that pathway. And so what happens is you can't have things in as toxic an environment as we raise our animals, without mRNAs, vaccinations, medications, all these other things. And so those and those are cheaper than the labor it takes to manage, so you have healthy animals and don't have to use that stuff. And so that creates an inordinate price structure at the cash register. Interestingly, when Putin invaded Ukraine and fertilizer went up 400%, we didn't even miss a beat because we don't buy any of it. And there for a while, actually, our top end beef, ribeye steaks, tenderloin, uh, T-bone steaks, New York strip, our top end beef steaks were cheaper than at Costco for a couple months. Because of the hiccup in the system. And so and so what we if we really want safe food, stable food, and secure food, if we want food security, safety, and stability, what we want to do is shorten the food chain, and reduce the dependency on far away. I'm just going to say far away. I'm not going to say foreign. I'm just
Yeah.
going to say far away things. I mean, now we're dealing with a dock workers strike and stuff. So any bobble in that chain really upsets everything. And so if we buy locally, and we or buy directly from somebody we know, who is producing, if the production is from geographically proximate sources. And of course, our beef is all, they're born here, we raise them here, it's all solar driven. It's all right here. You reduce the you know the the vulnerability to some nefarious agenda to affect the production equation.
Plus, the food just tastes way better.
Oh yeah,
It tastes much better. It makes great sandwiches and steak and ribeye. So as we get towards the end, because I feel like we can keep on talking for a long time. If there's like five things, you're a farmer, you've gone through this, you've kind of worked through again, everything you want to do is illegal kind of stuff, work through all this process. If there's four or five major things you feel like could change, you know, I think in order to change things for our country, it has to start locally. It's not going to be, finding the next Cisco or Tyson, for the United States. I feel it's going to be like finding individuals like you and empowering them and having, 50 Joel Salatins in the 50 states and, whatever, right? Like,
yeah,
if you were to say, like, if you want to change the system, so to speak, there are four or five things that you feel like from a from whether it's government saying taking their hands off or from take my hands off, take your hands off my food, right? I think that was
yeah,
Sinus book
yeah,
name, right?
yeah. Uh
Yeah.
huh.
um,
Yeah,
but you know from them and or a personal level, what are like five, maybe three for the government, three for people that you think could make a massive difference to get real food to people that's going to change their health and actually make it and actually induce entrepreneurs
yeah.
to actually have this lifestyle, which is actually not a lot of people actually would like to be outside working with their hands for a living.
Sure, sure. So the number one thing from a government policy standpoint would be the constitutional amendment that Congressman Thomas Massey has already put in, and what it says is the right of the people to grow. I'm reading it here off my wall. The right of the people to grow food and to purchase food from the source of their choice shall not be infringed. So it's obviously modeled after, shall make no law infringing. So it uses that same terminology. But the problem right now is that if you want to come to my farm, smell around, ask around, look around, and we as two consenting adults voluntarily engage in a food transaction, that is not legal, and you don't have a right. I don't have a. You don't have a right to procure the food from me, and I don't have any right to sell it to you. And uh, so what we have to do is put food on an equal standing with the right to assembly, the right to worship, the right to speak, as a fundamental human right to be able to choose my food. Most people have no clue that we don't have that right in our country, and federal judges have ruled from the bench. You got to. I mean, I'm quoting. American citizens do not have a right to choose their food. That is not a fundamental right, and I would suggest that should change. Probably an oversight on the part of the founders to include. Of course, when the country was founded, they couldn't have imagined a day when I couldn't go over to a neighbor and buy a glass of milk. They couldn't have imagined that. So here we are. So that's the number one thing. And if we did that within a day of that happening, there would be thousands and thousands and thousands of neighbor to neighbor, food transactions that are currently illegal. So that's the number one thing on the policy standpoint. On the personal standpoint, the number one thing I'm going to say is you got to get in your kitchen. Start enjoying your kitchen. We've got a million recipes and cookbooks and everything else. You've got every gadget at your disposal, and I mean, think about convenience foods. I'll give you an example. So one of our convenience foods. So you say, well, I can't always cook every day. Well, let me. Number one, to me, the number one litmus test of somebody that gets the food situation is: are you eating leftovers? Because if you're eating leftovers, it means you're not grazing in single service compartments. You're actually eating together. You're having a common serving bowl. Blah blah blah. But one of the most the coolest things that we do. So we have these cull hens. These are spent egg layers that have finished their productive life. So we process them, butcher them, and we'll put they're not huge. So we'll put 6 or 7 in a great big roaster pan in the oven, 350 for 4 hours. and they just fall apart. We pick all the meat off, of course, pour all the broth off. Now you've got broth, and we've got the picked off chicken. We cut it up in little pieces, put it in quart containers, and freeze it in the freezer. Now you have pre-cooked chicken. So when it's 4 o'clock, and oh no, the kids brought friends for dinner. Boom, you're ready to go with pre-cooked chicken. You can make a wonderful casserole, in no time with pre-cooked chicken. So those are the kinds of things you begin doing as you participate. It's like any skill. You don't get good at it when you don't get in the game. The only way you get good at it is get in the game. And this is what I say. The greatest lie is that I can change my life without changing my life. Well, you can't change your life without changing your life. If I had a way for you to change your life without changing your life, I'd probably be doing something else. But you can't. And so on the government side, it's food choice freedom, and on the personal side, it's participation. Those are my two. Those are my two main things.
Cool. Well, Joel, this has been a great, great conversation. You had mentioned that your stuff was available across the country. So if you could just tell people want to learn about you, they want to buy your food, they
Sure.
want to. I had no idea actually you shipped across state lines. Actually, was a new thing to me. So I'm
Uh-huh.
actually, I'd love for you to share that information. Obviously, I live I actually grew up in the Shenandoah Valley in Harrisonburg, so I'm very familiar with.
Yeah. I'm seeing that McGackiesville right there behind you.
That's where
That that's
my grandmother's from. Her family was there. Actually, German, Scotch Irish. They moved down in the
Yeah,
valley
yeah,
in
okay.
the late 1700s, right?
Yeah, yeah, there you are.
Those
There
are my
you are.
people,
It's
yeah. So
yeah, exactly where we're talking about. So our website is Polyface Farms, Polyface, and you get on our website, and there's everything there from the seminars that we do, where I'm speaking, books I've written, social media, and of course where you can buy things, buy all of our food. We have beef, pork, chicken, lamb, turkey, eggs, and if you have a friend somewhere that doesn't know where to go, lives in a city, and well, I don't know where a farmer is. Well, start here. We'll ship it right to their door. We ship every week, nationwide, and that's just continuing to grow and grow.
wow.
And we don't advertise. We don't make a great big deal, but it just continues to go up, and we'd be glad to service anybody. The logistics of distribution have changed dramatically in the last 10 to 15 years, and it's enabling people like us to touch, well, frankly, to touch people in the big cities that are now scared to go out of their houses because they might get mugged or shot at. And now we can ship it UPS right to their doorstep. They can grab their food, and they're up and running with the best food in the world. So visit
Wow.
us, our website, Polyface Farms, and glad to help you.
Yeah, if they get a Instapot, they can take your bones and make some amazing bone broth out of it as well.
That's right. That's exactly right.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, Joel, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Thanks for being gracious and just giving us about an hour and a half of your time just to pick your brain and share with my community. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Doctor. It's been a great privilege to be with you.
Take care.
You too.